Hello and welcome to Pull Up a Seat. My name is Jessica Pettit and I will be your tour guide today as we go through a number of different perspectives of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Up first, buckle up, is Mike Goodwin, who's going to be talking a little bit about being new to work and being new to work. What does that mean and how does that work out? So with no further ado, I will ask Mike to turn on your camera and buckle up. Here comes Mike.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Goodwin, and I'm here to talk to you about the various generations that are currently in our workforce. I'm constantly thinking about generations because it seems that I'm moving to the end of the line each and every day. So I'm a Gen Xer. I was raised as a lock-key kid, and I'm often thinking about generations as it relates to myself and my children, because my children are growing up in a totally different generation than I grew up. When I grew up, my generation, we couldn't Google anything when I was a kid. If I had questions about stuff when I was a kid, I had to go and have a conversation with someone. I had to go to the library and go through the card catalog to get information, or better yet, I had to go to the encyclopedia. And I was a weak little kid, so I couldn't pick up the encyclopedia. My children, they can Google any question that they have. I remember when I was a kid, when I didn't know how to spell a word, I would ask my mother how to spell a word. You know what my mother would tell me? To look it up in the dictionary. I was like, Mama, I don't know how to spell the word. Y'all, I spent 4 weeks in the L's looking for elephant. I was like, Mama, I don't think that word's in the dictionary. I see leprosy. I don't see anything about an elephant. I almost blacked out looking for pneumonia. I was like, that is not a real word at all. Somebody's pulling my leg. So in our current workforce, there are more generations than we've ever encountered in society. We have basically, in most cases, 4 generations that are in the workforce. The oldest generation that we have are baby boomers. Baby boomers are typically folks that were born from 1946 to 1964. That is the generation that is the senior group. Then we have Generation X, which is my generation. The folks that were born typically between 1965 to 1976. And these dates may vary a few years depending on the information that you're looking at. The next generation is the generation that we often spend a lot of time talking about and talking to, and that's the millennials. Millennials are typically born from 1980 to about 1997. And then we have the new group that has joined the party, Generation Z. And Generation Z showed up in 1997. I recently saw something today that said Generation Z were the masters of trolling. You cannot out-troll a Generation Z person. So don't try. Don't even attempt to do it. But what is important for all of us to understand is who are our coworkers? Who are the folks that we are engaging with each and every day? And what may be comfortable for you as a generational Xer or as a baby bloomer may be totally different experience for someone who is millennial. I was just talking to my daughter, who's a 14-year-old, about how important it is for her to put her tablet down, not to always have screen and FaceTime. I was talking to her about the importance of soft skills versus hard skills. And that's one of the criticisms that we often hear as it relates to millennials and Gen Xers, that they lack in the areas of soft skills. So in this presentation today, we will look at a number of things that will assist each and every one of us to be better coworkers, to be better employees, and also to be better supervisors and managers. I'm looking forward to spending this time with you. Was that 5?
Excellent. Mike, I have to say, I think the way that you troll a Gen Zer is you give them this book I grew up with called The Volumes Library. Make them respond on Twitter while holding that book.
Hopping on one leg.
That's what you do. That's what you do. Mike, thank you very much for being here. What I think is going to be really cool about this whole program is that by laying that foundation about how each one of us is representing groups and is different than those groups, but how we work across difference is a perfect segue to our next speaker. And Amy is going to talk specifically about how diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually everybody's job. So, Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Jessica. So, as Mike mentioned, there's a lot of different people in the workplace right now. And one of the things that I think it's important for all of us to do is to get to know as many of those people as possible. And that's what I'm going to talk to you just a little bit today about networking beyond bias and how you can make diversity a competitive advantage for your career. Now, some of you may be looking at me going, Amy, I know all about networking and I don't want to be this guy. And if not that guy, that guy. Slides are in the wrong order. I don't want to be this guy. And hey, I get it. I didn't want to be that guy either. When I first started what I considered networking, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to be salesy. I don't want to be schmoozy. I don't want to deal out my business cards like a blackjack dealer in Vegas. I'm not trying to sell somebody a used car. I just want to make friends. And I was able to finally reframe networking for myself away from the sales and marketing and into how do I make good relationships for the long term? Now, the reason I say that networking is a diversity, equity, and inclusion position, it's something that we can do, is because so many of us tend to surround ourselves with people who look, think, and act just like we do. Part of it, though, isn't our fault, right? We grow up in areas where everybody looks like us and we don't really leave home, or we go somewhere and we find our group that fits us, right? Where we feel like we fit in. And so we just kind of hang out where we're comfortable. And we tell ourselves that that's enough. We tell ourselves we're doing a good job. Then what happens is we get into the workplace and we realize everybody isn't like us and we have to interact with a lot of different people. So we'll go to a diversity and inclusion training, or we go to unconscious bias training. And what happens? They say, hey, that's okay. So long as your heart's in the right place, just understand this is part of the human condition. But if you take nothing else away from what I'm telling you today, I want you to take away that your heart can't be in the right place if you never move your feet. And what I mean by that is diversity, equity, and inclusion is about where we show up and what we do and how we treat people. It's not about what we think or what we feel. In order to create the kinds of cultures in our organizations where everybody feels included, where everybody gets to do their best work, and everybody gets to come to the table with ideas, we have to be sure that we are part of that solution, part of that welcoming committee every day at work. And the best way for us to do that is to build a professional network that represents all sorts of different people from all different generations, different industries, across racial and ethnic boundaries, across national borders, and even, across gender and gender identity. So there are so many different ways we can connect with people who are not like us. What happens when we do that, when we move our feet and show up in a different place from where we maybe would naturally go if we didn't push ourselves just a little bit, is that we start to develop a network that is robust, that's diverse, and ultimately that's inclusive. And so in the full session that I do, I will actually take you through an exercise where we will measure not just the depth of your network, but also the breadth of your network and the depth of each relationship in that network. And we'll talk about how do you network like a champ so that you have a good, robust view of a 360-degree view of your own career, your own company, your own industry. But also, how are you creating opportunities for yourself and sharing those opportunities with others? Because at the end of the day, all we're doing in our careers is trying to contribute the most that we can, trying to bring other people in so they can contribute the most that they can, so we can build more opportunity for everyone. One of the ways we can do this, really practical next step for you, is ask people, when do they feel included? And you know what? I would love it if you would right now in the chat, let me know, when do you feel included? Because people will answer this question all kinds of different ways. Maybe you feel included when someone holds space for you in a meeting so that you can ask a question. Or maybe you feel included when your boss checks in with you to make sure that your opinion has been taken into account. Maybe, like me, you feel included when people pronounce your last name correctly because you know how it feels to have your name made fun of or mispronounced on purpose. For some people, it might be asking about their families. For other people, it might be never asking about their families. But we don't know unless we ask. So if you are the manager of a team, or you have somebody new on your team, or maybe you've just never asked before, lead with this question. I'm so glad you're here. How can I help you feel included? But here's the catch. You have to go actually do the thing that they say. So if someone says, I have a peanut allergy and I feel included when there are no peanuts on the menu for catered events so that I don't have to worry about my health and safety. Well, if you know that, then it's incumbent upon you to make sure that that person's safe in the buffet line, right? If you're the one that's ordering the food. If somebody says, I really appreciate it, I really feel included when people get my pronouns right, then you need to make an effort to make sure that you're getting that person's pronouns correct. And it's different for different people. Some people want to be called into the conversation. Some people need time to think. Everybody needs something just a little bit different. We don't know unless we ask. Where I think most of us get tripped up in diversity and inclusion is that we tend to think about big problems that none of us can solve on our own. And what I want to invite you to do with me right now is push back your chair and sit just on the edge of your chair. You all brought your hula hoops today, right? Oh, okay. Well, just pretend that you brought your hula hoop with you. I want you to hold that hula hoop out in your hands. So shoulders back, arms out, hold your hula hoop out to your sides. If you didn't bring one, just pretend. It's okay. And I want you to imagine for a moment that you're not responsible for the whole world. And you're not responsible for solving all those big problems. What you're responsible for is what happens inside your hula hoop. You can control your responses. You can control how you make people feel. And you can make that 3-foot circle around you an inclusive space. When you do that, when you focus on making that an inclusive space, you get to take it with you everywhere you go. When other people see you being inclusive, they want to be part of your inner circle. Your influence expands. And when people want to be a part of what you're doing, that's what makes you truly a leader. So I want to invite you all to step inside that hula hoop, make it the most inclusive space you can, and take it with you everywhere you go. Back to you, Jess.
All right, so let me get this straight. First off, I troll trolls by trolling them with a very large book. And then to close the gap between intention and impact, I'm working out because I have to move my feet and hula hoop.
Yes.
Nobody said that I was going to sweat in cashmere today.
Inclusion is an action, Jess.
All right, maybe Tony will come up with the reasons why I don't have to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Thank you very much, Amy. Tony is here to join us. Not only is it about my own hula hoop, it's the whole organization's job. What are you talking about, Tony? I am a hot mess. Really? The whole thing? I don't know. Let's find out.
Well, thanks, Jess. In 2012, my wife got an opportunity of a lifetime. It was her dream job. And so we decided to move our family from the Midwest up to New York. Now, we didn't immediately move to New York City. We moved to this beautiful area at a base of the Catskill Mountains. Gorgeous. Literally, we lived on a mountain on an acre of land. And so I was really excited to tell my kids, we're going to go up there and they're going to see all sorts of wildlife. They'll see, they're used to seeing squirrels, but now they're going to see deer. We used to stop on the side of the highway and look at the deer, but now we're actually going to see the deer. They're even going to be black bear. And literally at times when my kids were waiting for the bus, they would see black bear. But you know what no one told us about when moving to New York? When no one says, now here's what you need to really think about. No one told us, there's going to be rattlesnakes. Yeah, rattlesnakes. Like they're everywhere. Like when you go to the golf course, there are signs that say, don't come here looking for your $2 ball. It's not that there may be snakes. We know that they're snakes. In fact, 3 miles from our house was a rattlesnake preserve because, of course, we'd hate to run out of rattlesnakes in the state of New York. Anyway, one day I'm in the back of my yard and I'm near the edge of my property. I'm raking leaves and I hear my neighbor say something. And as I looked up, I felt something slither across my front foot. I'm sorry. Did I forget to mention that I was wearing sandals at the time? I looked down and it was about this big around. Now, do you think I consciously stopped and said, I wonder what kind of snake that is. I wonder if it's venomous. I should look for a rattle or snake or fangs. No. Before I knew what happened, I was 60 yards away on my deck going, what the? And you can imagine what came after what the. But here's the key. Before I knew what happened, I had responded. You see, quite often we hear about this phrase unconscious or implicit biases. So let's break it down for a moment. Unconscious, it's this idea of before we're consciously aware of it, it literally has to deal with which part of the brain is reacting. But bias. In today's world, that word is often overused or misused. We often think of bias in terms of prejudice, and rightly so. We think of racism and misogyny, and that's certainly not incorrect, but there's another word that, to me, more properly explains it. And that word is algorithm. Okay, that sounds really complex. Well, Tony, what's an algorithm? Well, different formulas added at varying amounts. And okay, here's an example of an algorithm. A recipe. For example, if you want to make pound cake, you take a pound of butter, a pound of flour, a pound of sugar, and a pound of eggs, and you put them together and you make pound cake. Now, the truth is you could add other ingredients or put them in various amounts to still get a cake, but you wouldn't have pound cake. Thing is, it turns out we actually have recipes for a lot of other things. What does smart look like? What about safe? What's dangerous? What's trustworthy? And the thing is, many of these recipes are happening at a level below conscious awareness. Researchers from University of Virginia, Harvard University, and MIT came up with what they call the implicit associations test. And it's a fantastic test. Now, it doesn't measure bias, but it does measure how we unconsciously associate things. But here's what I want you to see. Since 1998, 4.5 million people have taken that test. That's a lot of data. And as a former engineer, well, I don't know if you're ever a former engineer. So as an engineer, data is really important to me. So let's, for a moment, take a look at what the data tells us. First, 75. Turns out 75% have an implicit or unconscious, because you can use those phrases interchangeably, preference for white people over Black people. Now, in this particular case, that means they associate white with good, safe, and smart, and Black with the opposite. 75%. 76% of people more readily associate men with having careers and women with staying home with the family. 76%. And 76% of people have preferences unconsciously for able-bodied people over those with some form of disability. Those are the numbers. Those are the things we have to deal with. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. But here's the thing. You heard what I said, but now let's talk about what you didn't hear me just say. You did not hear me just say, well, 75% of white people have a preference for white over Black. I didn't say that, did I? I didn't say, well, 76% of men more readily associate men with having careers and women with staying home with the family. No, I didn't say that. I didn't even say, well, 76% of able-bodied people have a preference for able-bodied people. No, because that's not how bias works. Bias is far more a function of what we've been exposed to, what's been programmed into our subconscious hard drive. In fact, we know about 40% of Black people actually have a preference for white over Black, and about 40% Black over white, and 20% equal or neutral. When it comes to the career thing, turns out that number doesn't change whether it's men or women taking the test. There's a lot there. That means, number one, you can have a preference against your own self-interest. Think about that. That affects when you think that you're ready to do something or able to do something or qualified to do something. But also, here's what that may mean. Sometimes we can find an example of a person who believes what we believe because they have that same bias. But that doesn't make it right. That simply means they've been exposed to the same things that we've been exposed to. So you can have a bias against your own self-interest. But not only that, you can actually have a bias subconsciously that goes against what you consciously know to be good, moral, and right. Think about that. You can know something's right, but then just like when I saw the snake, all of a sudden you're responding and reacting before you're thinking, and it literally sabotages your conscious values. And see, I say that to tell us that unconscious bias can never be used as a measure of whether we're good or bad. It's not a barometer for morality. And that's important because far too often, we're afraid to have the conversations. We're walking on eggshells. We're afraid of being stigmatized. We're afraid to be accused. And so we stay in our own comfort zone versus venturing out and actually making a change. And so as we move forward, here's what I want us to understand. It's not about our intention. Because even when we're well-intentioned, our unconscious thoughts and our feelings can influence our attempts to be objective. And so I appreciate what Amy said just a few moments ago. In this case, it's not about our heart, it's about our feet. And as we move forward and we talk about practically what can we do to increase inclusion and to mitigate bias, I'm assuming that we all have good intentions. But that does not mean that we're not responsible for the impact. Our intent may be good, but if we're not aware of our impact, we can find out that our behaviors end up not matching the values that we so cherish in our hearts. And so that's really going to be our focus moving forward. As we explore this program, it's really an exploration not only into our heart, but into our actions, so that maybe we can make a conscious effort to become more inclusive, not only as individuals and not only as an organization, but truthfully as a society. Handing back over to you, Jess.
Well stated and powerful, of course. Thank you very much. I think it's important that balance between that data and foreshadowing to a pound cake recipe. Don't think I didn't miss that part. Tony, I'm curious, and I want to ask you a question, and then I'm going to pull everybody back up and ask everybody the same question. But Tony, I'm curious, when we talk about the individual differences, the systems within organizations, the greater organizations, and then just being a person at the grocery store, right? Can you talk a little bit about that gap between our hearts and our actions when we're not at work? This is a professional development, obviously, but these skills manage to show up in our real life all the time. Sometimes we're even wearing sandals with reptiles.
Well, let's do this, because I think sometimes we think, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's not like, I'm burning crosses and doing things like that on people's yards. But, it's kind of like Ling Chi, death by a thousand cuts. And so I want to share a quick story. A few months ago, I was walking down the street. I live in Harlem now. And these two young Black teenagers came out of a corner store, a bodega. And I saw a police officer and he said something to him. And I'm like, okay, I kind of stopped. I was walking my dog and I'm like, I'm not sure what he said. And the teens are like, they couldn't figure out what he said because it was on the loudspeaker. It's kind of like, when you order McDonald's. And so they're like, I'm sorry, what'd you say? And the guy rolled down his window and goes, oh, Happy New Year. And he goes, oh, Happy New Year to you. And I froze. And I started getting emotional. And I started crying. Because it's so rare that as a Black man, we're treated normal, that we're treated like everyone else, that it's a memorable experience. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's part of the reality, is that we may not be aware that we're doing these, we're slightly turning away from someone, or we're pulling our purse, or we're locking the door, or we're giving someone else more attention, but it is like a mountain of trauma that is building up to the point where it is a memorable experience when it's not there.
Yeah, it's powerful. And thank you for sharing a story of your own biases, right? Like, it's not just the others. So I want to pull the rest of the panel back up. And one of my favorite questions to kind of ask everybody while you're together is, if you could, what is the question you wish people would ask you, and what is the answer? And we'll start with Amy, and then we'll go to Mike, and then we'll wrap up with Tony. So the question you wish people would ask you, and what is the answer? Go ahead, Amy.
So the question I wish people would ask me is, how do I start? And I do get that question a lot. And my answer is, especially right now, when we're all sort of homebound with, the threat of COVID, as soon as we leave our houses, it's really easy to build our networks online. And so I would ask you to start, look at who's in your social media feeds right now. Are they all people that look like you? How far do you have to scroll down before you see someone from a group that you don't normally interact with, or that doesn't represent your own demographic group? And if you have to scroll a ways, I would say go find some thought leaders who maybe don't fit the mold in your industry, or who don't look like you, and start following them and start following their followers, and listen to those conversations without, especially if you're in a majority group, without inserting your own opinion. Just listen. Mm-hmm. And then when things open up, I recommend that you go to the conference that isn't for you and do the same thing. Sit in the back and listen for a long time before you speak.
That's great. And Mike, as we head to you, I think my takeaway, Amy, from you today is the idea of diversifying your feed, metaphorically or not, doesn't mean anything unless there's equitable opportunity for you to also learn from the diversification of your feed, because that ultimately is inclusion. Thank you so much, Amy, for being with us today. Mike, let's go to you. What is the question you wish people would ask you, and what is the answer?
So, Jess, the question I often think that I wish people would ask is, how can I be a problem solver? Most times folks are asking, how do we fix the problem? They're not asking, what are the things that they can control with, or in the sphere of their influence? Just small things, just little things that, I call it a board of directors. Who are your mentors? Mm-hmm. Are they people that are similar to you, that look like you, that you feel most comfortable with? Or are they voices that are contrary to your natural inclinations? I just really wish people would ask the questions of themselves: how can I problem solve? And if you say, man, how can I problem solve? Then that, your brain, the way our brain works, it goes and tries to find an answer. Like if you're saying, how can I get involved with improving this situation. Your brain will begin to formulate ideas. But if you just say, so what do we do next? What's the step? What book do I need to read? What TED Talk do I need to listen to? It's like, no, man, it's not what someone else has already created. What can you create? What's the momentum that you can create in your own sphere of influence?
Absolutely. And hopefully today's conversation is a momentum starter. So Mike, I think that's a great takeaway, right? Is that this is not a chance for you to just be listening to our recommendations, but this should inspire exactly what you said. What are you going to do, and begin to do that? So thank you so much, Mike, for being here today. It's been wonderful to be able to work with you. And Tony, just out of curiosity, what is the question you wish people would ask you, and what is the answer?
Well, it's like, where do I start? Which question do I want to go with? So the one that's standing out to me right now is, so how do we make our culture more inclusive? Because too often what people say, okay, so how do we become inclusive, or how do we get inclusion? And really there's a sense, what they're really asking often is, how can we do this in the cheapest, most pain-free way where everyone can be comfortable, and yet we could somehow achieve this monumental goal? And you can't. And the reality is, and I think about what Amy actually shared, it's everybody's responsibility, right? Sometimes I think, well, it's up to the leaders, and it's not just up to leaders. Well, it's up to the frontline workers. It's up to the associates. It's up to the team members. And the reality is that we all contribute to the culture, because the culture is nothing more than a measurement of the relationships within inside of an organization. And truthfully, most people don't know where their culture really is. They either listen to the people who tell them it's awesome, or the people say, oh, it's horrible. But that's just the ends of the continuum, and figuring out where are the nooks and crannies where people are hiding, and how do we bring them out? And then how do we create real inclusion, which is different than advocacy? Because advocacy can mean, well, I'm really passionate about the gender pay gap, or I'm really passionate about the rights of the LGBTQIA community. But inclusion is all or nothing. It's everyone feeling included, everyone being included, everyone having access to resources, everyone having access to opportunities. If you don't have that, yeah, you can have advocacy, and you can have people who are staunchly, fighting for people's rights, but it's not true inclusion until it's everyone.
Absolutely. Well stated, Tony. And hopefully everyone will be able to have an opportunity to pull up a seat at this table. It's so fascinating doing DEI work for years that we often talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion by starting at like, whose table is this? Who's not typically invited? Who is invited? And we're asking you literally to coin a phrase from Dr. Lisa Jenkins. When we start actually talking about intersectionality, we need to demonstrate not just the intersectionality of all of our identities at the same time, and provide space for everyone's identities that they hold at the same time. But at that intersection is the data, the intention, the impact, and the ability to keep that momentum going. So thank you very much for spending some time with us today with Pull Up a Seat. If there's anything we can ever do to be of service, we are in your pocket. Thank you very much. Have a great day.